Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to Wednesday night album club on the Heavy Metallurgy show. Joined by guests, cohorts, co-conspirators. What happened to
Sorry,
Kellen? There he is.
bounced out there.
Oh yeah,
I'm
we got
back.
Kellen from Killing for Company. We've got Jim Morbid Crank from Eihwaz Recordings. Links in both the descriptions to access their wares, and also cheers to our friend Alan, who's in the chat. Alan started back to work today. Professor Steele is shaping the future geologists of America's minds, and he'll be here once in a while on the Wednesdays, but maybe not all of them. He's just super busy, but Friday he will be back for sure. But how you guys all doing today?
I'm good.
Absolutely good.
Cool. Kellen gave us a pretty cool treat this past week to check out. Before we get into that, I want to thank everybody for last Friday, the Keeper Reap. We had a great time with Rick from the Dreadful Minutes. Thanks to everybody that donated during that thing. Holy crap, you guys are awesome. It was very nice of all of you. Appreciate it. And yeah, so let's, without further ado, we're talking today about Athens, Greece, Septicflesh. A little bit of history. They were formed in 1990. They put out, oh my gosh, 6 albums from 1994 to 2003, where they split up for a bit, reformed in 2007, and been at it off and on for 32 years. You've got a couple different eras of the band. They pre-breakup, pretty down and old school sounding, death doomed type of vibe. Afterwards, they got a lot more symphonic and donned Dune, Fremen, Arrakis suits and started going that route. But what I've heard has been cool. But this has been a fun one. This is an album I've heard in the past, but it's not a band I've ever just. The Greek scene I'm late to. I'm not going to lie. The Greek, for some reason, I avoided the Greek stuff. There was a style and a sound that never really clicked with me. What about you guys? Where are you guys at with the Greek phenomenon with metal?
I mean, I would say it was later for me. It was not so. For specifically, my first exposure to the Greek scene was to the Greek black metal scene, and that definitely came after the Norwegian scene for me.
Oh, sure.
But I think Septicflesh is a whole different animal, and we'll kind of get into that tonight. But I really agree that it's something that, as a unique band and a scene that kind of always seems to be secondary by comparison to a lot of, whether you're talking about death metal or black metal, or I guess they have a really great traditional heavy metal or epic heavy metal scene as well. But I think it ends up being a secondary scene, and that was kind of how I, learned about it. So how about you, Jim?
Yeah, like Marty, I was definitely late to the party on it. Running Christ definitely, got me more into it, and which Marty and another friend of ours, Jake, got me into. So Diamante Contract, Non Servium. I mean, those are records I still play right now. I mean, from there I got into Verathron. So I had their early stuff. But yeah, it's funny. The Septicflesh thing passed me by, and the first time I heard them was like in the mid 2000 or whatever you call them, 2005 or something. And yeah, it was all symphonic and everything, and I just immediately dismissed it as like, oh, this is not for me. I had no idea until you put this on our list that this first album of theirs sounded like this. Like, to me, very reminiscent of Rotting Christ, early Rotting Christ and early Verathron.
You
but
think
they all
so?
kind of came out. Yeah, to me it is. Yeah. I think the and we'll talk about it later. But I think you put, not so much Septicflesh's first album, but the second one, and then the debuts of full length debuts, not the demos or the EPs, but first Rotting Christ, first Verathron, His Majesty at the Swamp, and the Armani Contract, and I feel like they all kind of work together. more like the second album for Running Cry. So the first one was definitely more death metal, but the second one was kind of weird, and but we'll talk about the reasons why. But I'm glad we were taking this deeper dive, and we're kind of putting the focus on it, because it's the scene isn't my go-to, just like you guys. But whenever I do get turned on to it again, I'm like, I get excited about it again because it feels fresh.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was so enamored with the Norwegian stuff that I heard, Riding Christ and earlier stuff, and it just didn't click with me until I got a promo for Triarchy of the Lost Lovers when that came out. That album is a pretty special record. Initially, I didn't like it. It just seemed so strange and different from what was going on at the time. Excuse me, but it really clicked with me, and it made me start going back and investigating, Verathron and Rotting Christ and stuff like that. And it was like another one of those "what the hell was I thinking" moment. The Greek scene has got its own vibe and its own sound, and it's really cool. There's a lot of really great melody in within the sound. But we'll get into that here in a second. But what, Kellen, starting with you, what was your first impression on this record?
So I picked this record up just as like an additional Discogs buy. So my introduction to Septicflesh was actually in 2008. A zine turned blog did a cover or did a review of Communion, which came out in 2008. It was definitely the symphonic era of the band. And
yeah.
The line that got me was, this band is from Greece. The orchestra and choir are from Prague, and the whole lot of them are free to hit my liquor cabinet anytime they want. And I just, like, line grabbed me. And I did not know what to expect. And at this point, symphonic death metal wasn't in my sort of, catalog, or I didn't think about death metal in general being symphonic. And I liked the record, but it was unique. And I kept on hearing about the early records from Septicflesh and how unique they were and how they needed to be, be listened to. But I just never, anyway. So here we are years later, and I pick up this release thinking that it was going to be great. But after, listening to Communion in 2008, I put this on and it was very different. I really did not know what to make of it. I kind of thought it was like, I wasn't getting it. I'm getting this wrong. There's something that I don't understand about this. Specifically, I had it in my car and I heard Shamanic Rite, which is, I think, the 9th track here. Mm-hmm. And the chorus, sort of female vocals on that, really stood out. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is not for me at all.
No, that song I've got, the good and the bad. That song is on the fence for me. It's good up until the no crap that she does, and it's like, stop. Yeah.
but I guess over this past week, when I've listened to it a bunch, it like really grew on me. And so we'll kind of go through the nuances of that. But my initial impression was, man, this is a disaster, and I'm missing the point for sure. So that was my initial impression of this now classic record.
Right. How about you, Jim? What were your thoughts first time you hit play on this?
The first time, it was like, okay, the vocals are too loud, the guitars are too far down, the backing operatic female vocalist was too loud.
Yeah.
And I still, that last comment, I still feel like her voice is still too far up in the mix. But actually, I switched headphones. I got some different ones, and then the mix sounded better to me. I still feel like the vocals are too loud, but once I got past like the kind of odd production, like I loved like the guitar playing. I loved the melody lines and the choruses that they would do, like really, doomy, like, sad, but not like, super slow funeral doom where you're just like depressed, not that there's anything wrong with that. I love that stuff. But a little more upbeat, like, I don't want to say hopeful, but there was like a lot of emotion behind the guitar playing, like just a lot of like, maybe sorrow is the right word, and power. And that sort of underpinning all the kind of the weird vocal theatrics got me through the rest of the record. And so on subsequent listens, like Kellen said, it was a grower. I just kept hearing more and more cool guitar interplay, more and more cool decisions. I loving the keyboards. I'll take like cheesy keyboard sounds over a real orchestra any day. That's just me. I like the goofy, we're broke metal construction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that stuff in the 90s, which was very prevalent, especially in the Greek scene, it made me super happy. Because like I said, I like Rotting Christ, I like Barathron, and that's kind of how they sound. They were trying to be symphonic, but Casios or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's why it's awesome. The crazy programmed drums, like super obvious in their program. But again, to me, like that's what gives it its power. I mean, these guys, they just didn't give a shit. We're gonna like bam, 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 and it's it's gonna sound like what it is. And I think it has a lot of guts to stick to your vision. Even when you're maybe encumbered by budgetary concerns, like a lot of extreme metal bands were in the 90s. And so all that stuff combined, made me really like it, even at first with all its flaws. But they started to kind of move past me more on subsequent listens.
Right on. Well, for me, it wasn't a surprise how, like I said, I think I've heard there's an EP they put out around this time too that I remember sitting down and listening to with friends back in the day and liked. And so, I mean, it wasn't a surprise, but to sit and listen to it again, one thing that did surprise me, Jim thought it puts him back in mind of like Rotting Christ and Varathron, but I didn't get that. I get like those melody lines, super melodic, very mournful melody lines, remind me of Dance of December Souls, Brave Murder Day era Catatonia. The English Death Doom scene, Little My Dying Bride, a little early Paradise Lost in there. It just got those two, Sweden by way of Swedish mournful guitar lines, along with that early English doom sound kind of thrown in there, and it just really awakened that nostalgia, beast of nostalgia. And aside from its flaws, I mean, for me, the lady singing on it, I just that is usually a hard sell for me. I mean, I love in metal, like you got really heavy, cool death vocals, and then you got an opera singer on top of it. It's just very rarely am I like, oh, that's great. Yeah, I rarely have, and this is no exception. It's just like, I get what they're doing. They're trying to be arty and a little more avant-garde, I guess. And like Jim mentioned, way too loud in the mix, way too loud, and largely unnecessary. It's really, it's an after. I mean, her inclusion really strikes me as an afterthought. But other than that, I really was quite. It made me listen to a couple albums that came out before this, and there's less of that. I do party with the arty on occasion. That's a good one, Jack. But yeah, in this case, it just I don't know. But I really like the old school mix and sound and feel of it. Yeah, it might be kind of low budget, but it's real. It sounds real. Albums today, I mean, you have a real drummer, but they try really hard to make a real drummer sound like a machine in the studio. So when you have a machine on an old school production, it doesn't bother me. It just doesn't seem and the drums are so pedestrian along with the music. It doesn't matter. And the harmonies and the guitars are so strong. It kind of I don't even think, the drums at that point are just there as a metronome. I don't even really notice, unless of course you listen to like Shades of God by Paradise Lost, where the drummer is bad. I mean, I could go on that album and play drums better than that. And that's not saying anything. I can't play drums for shit. It's just a real blah pedestrian, live drummer. He didn't do anything to pizzazz that record up. But with the drum machine, it does its job, and there's so much other stuff going on. I'm not thinking so much about the machine, but yeah, I mean, I guess mine in a roundabout long ass rant here. I was surprised at how good this is, how much I enjoyed it, and how much it reminded me of the past in a good way, for sure. But yeah, and I guess let's talk about. Jim threw up a kind of a cool little sidebar here. Rotting Christ, Verathron, Septicflesh debuted their first full-length albums all around the same time, 93 through 94, and musically had a similar style. Lots of mid-tempo riffs, guitars a bit lower in the mix, heavy use of keyboards, programmed drums. Why do you think extreme metal Greek bands of this era embrace certain sounds and approaches in composition and recording? Kellen.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
So I don't, in terms of why they went that route, I guess for me, I initially, when I saw that question, I'm always sort of thinking about the Greek scene in contrast. And the biggest thing that I initially took away from the bands that you mentioned here, in Rotting Christ and Verathron and I guess Septicflesh to some degree, is just this, like, yes, melodic, but it's the warmth of these records, but they still have thematically this sort of occult, right? Specifically, we're talking about the black metal bands here. And Septicflesh is kind of doing a different thing in terms of the lyrical concepts, but it's just like, yes, it's dark, but the sound is a warmer melodic sort of feel to it. And so I don't know how to describe that in terms of like a consistent strain between all those bands. Because I think, the other, Marty mentioned the death doom scene out of England. The Swedish scene, bands that were circling in my mind were like Tiamat or Therion.
Yeah.
Just because they have that doom and a little bit of goth feel to it. And I don't know why they chose that route. So the first thing is, like, is it a geographical reason, right? Like, is it literally, the sort of world that they are inhabiting within, parts of the Mediterranean, parts of Italy, other bands that in this black metal style, I think of like Mystifier from Brazil, where they're playing it's black metal for those bands, but very different sound by contrast to the Scandinavian scene.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
And which is funny because they were very in contact with that scene during the day, back in the day. Right. Which is funny. But anyway.
They spoke to the same fans. Yeah. Right. It just, they sounded completely different. And then the other part of it was, I don't know, like, in the sound, there's something about like when the sound of a record and the themes of a record need to match. So that contrast part of it is their like paganism or their mythology is based in the polytheism of Greek mythology, right? Yep. And I think that's on this record as well. So as opposed to like a Norse mythology, which is all wrapped up in the cold, the ice, the mountains, the Scandinavian landscape. So there's a synergy there that makes complete sense when you think about, the way those records sound. You look at the album artwork, like everything, there's a cohesiveness to that world. So I think all of those are factors in terms of why they pursued, sometimes like a certain kind of mix or, having programmed drums, for example. Those are very specific, so I don't necessarily know. And if it's just like the sonic quality that they contributed to the record, they wanted to match all of those things. But when I just think about sort of the connective strain in those bands, that's the first kind of, those are the topics that come to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Very well put. Jim, what do you think?
Well, I think what Kellen says makes perfect sense. And, and I think that, whether it was intentional or not, or if it was just something, kind of floating around in the back of their minds, they kind of wanted their own identity, but still have the darkness. And so I completely agree with that. And, even though their full length debuts came around about the same year or so, there's a lot of demos, going back and forth. There was EPs and things like that. So, I'm thinking that maybe, from a production standpoint, maybe they were kind of inspirational to one another. They're listening to each other's stuff. They're doing tape trading and saying, hey, you know what? These guys are doing it with a couple of dudes and a drum machine. We can do it too. And, throwing some cheap keyboards on that. But that whole decision to literally have this huge left turn from the Scandinavian sound. I mean, they're really, sonically, they're black metal in tone and sort. I don't mean tone, but like musically, but they're black metal and attitude and atmosphere. But they're not black metal at all in terms of the way they play guitar, drums, bass, anything, vocals or anything. And so maybe they were all kind of unconsciously saying, there's a Scandinavian sound, we're from the Mediterranean, we're from Greece, we're going to have, our sound, and not necessarily maybe a scene, but, I know, those guys were all aware of each other and everything. So maybe all of that sort of combined, that sort of historical need to differentiate themselves, but also like, a modern take on metal, modern in the early 90s anyway, to embrace that darkness in a way that felt, significant to them, but also within reach, with keyboards they could afford, with a 4-track, with a drum machine or whatever, maybe, super talented drummers were hard to find in Greece at that time.
I was going to say they're all really young when this stuff was going on too. So either the drummers that were starting out weren't that good yet, or there just weren't any.
Yeah. And that's definitely, true. I my early days were from Bama, and finding a drummer, imagine that, rural Alabama, was extremely hard.
Yeah, my first 2 bands were all drum machine too, because there were no drummers up here, none, 0.
Because it's hard as shit to do, man. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no,
Okay. Well, for me, a lot of that stuff, I agree with all of it, and they're probably a young bunch of guys all hanging around. I mean, you look at the Norwegian scene, it was the Black Circle was 9 people around that. And a lot of those bands had a similarity. The Norwegian sound is very much dictated by a strumming style or a chording style. When they played the chords, they would play all 6 strings. They play all 6 strings. Euronymous kind of started that. Varg did that. A lot of those bands, that was part of the Norwegian sound, playing those chords and letting all 6 strings ring out as you're playing them. It just gave it a more weird atmospheric feel. You got 9 kids, they're kids all doing this shit, influencing each other, paying attention to each other's demos, hanging out, drinking, doing what they're doing. The same thing's happening in Greece. And it's Rotting Christ and Verathron and Necromantia at a certain extent were the 3 big ones that kind of took off first. I mean, that early Necromantia stuff, I'm sorry. The first album with the vampire on it, it really sucks. I don't like that record at all. The one after it is way better. It's a much better album. But the first album is corny and just shitty. It's just 2 bass players. It's just not good. And these bands were really developing at a like I think Jack said it in here. They're developing at a quick pace. You get doing it, you get better at it. You hear what you've done and hear that it might not be that good. You adjust. And where Verathron and Rotting Christ, I think those 2 bands in particular had a lot in common sound wise. Other than vocally, Necro Abyssos had more of a deep vocal style than Sakis did, but those 2 bands are kind of very similar. The drum machine, the black metal feel, the Greek, they were doing the same style of riffing. That's what was really kind of cool to hear. I mean, this is their 3rd album, right? 3rd or 4th album.
This is their 3rd.
Yeah, this is their 3rd album. So they're already developing a lot. I went back and listened to their first, and to be honest, I liked it a bit better because there wasn't a lot of the frou-frou lady singing on it. But it still has that same feel. It's got that real emotive, mournful riffing. And I don't want to, like the Rotting Christ Verathron, it's got, I don't know, is it syncopated? It's just got a very interesting picking style in there. That kind of dictated established the Greek sound to me. And this like I said, I hear a lot of early Catatonia, to be honest. And you're right, Therion.
I think you're right about My Dying Bride too, Marty. And when
Yeah.
you said that, I was like, yes, yeah,
Yeah, a little bit of that early Paradise Lost too. Just really kind of sad, heavy. The music is really good, and even the more embellishments they put on here with the trying to add the early stuff. I don't know if he's on this one, but the keyboardist from Rotting Christ was in this band early on. I don't know if he's on this album or not, but he was one of the founding members of it, and yeah, I just think they influenced each other, and obviously, where Rotting Christ, Necromantia, and Verathron were all kind of looking within in their cult in their own area. I think Septicflesh might have been looking a little bit further north, embracing. They've got the feel and a slight feel of the Greek sound in atmosphere, but the mournful harmonies of the northern countries, of the Scandinavian countries, I think that kind of influenced their early material for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's a really great sound.
Some Peaceville stuff.
Yeah, some definite Peaceville in there too. But anybody anything else to add on this topic before we move on? I think we all kind of.
No, I think we got it.
What do you guys think about the musicality and composition of Ophidian Wheel?
Well, is this for me? Yeah. Initially, I was a little bit concerned as to where this was going, but I never got bored in this record. Even the parts that I disliked, it was always engaging. And the word that kept on coming out, or coming to me during the course of this record, was like, it has a tremendous amount of personality. It's just once I kind of got a feel for the melodic quality of this record, I kept on looking for them, the melodies and the songs, and then I got the songs had individuality, they had a sense of pacing, the instrumentals broke it up. Mm-hmm. The mix, we'll get into production quality, is problematic, but like, once you leave that rhythm guitar and the melody would sort of step in front and take center stage, these songs come to life. And I thought that a lot of great songwriting, interesting, sort of, if it's much of it's mid-paced, you don't have a lot of dynamic swings. They just sort of embellish with vocalists and keyboards, and there's a lot of give and take in terms of who's at the center of the stage, because rarely is there a rhythm guitar that defines the tone of this record. There's some other component that sort of grabs your attention. I really liked the songwriting here.
Me too.
And there's a lot to come back and enjoy. In this, it's still growing on me. Like, I still will listen to this record and find things to like about it. And great songwriting. Yep.
What do you think, Jim?
I agree 100%, Colin. Like it's the melody lines on the guitars. They put them in the bridges. They put them in the choruses, and once you started picking that out. Underneath the admittedly thick layer of vocals, the thick layer of keyboards. When you started kind of picking out like what those guitars were doing, I saw some real skill there, some real talent, and I had a real connection, with like the emotions behind, those melody lines. They were dark and they were sorrowful, but not like, emo boys. It was more like, pushing through with power, those dark emotions, and so through every song, it got to where I started tuning my ear into what was happening there on the guitars. And, you said it perfectly, Kellen. Like, you were never bored, even when you were annoyed, even when the vocals got too loud and you're like, wait a minute, man, I can't hear the guitars anymore. Oh man, the programmed drums are doing blast beats. It sounded like a wash. That there's weird moments on it like that. But again, you were never bored. It kept your attention. It didn't fade in the background. It demanded that you pay attention. It was really difficult to. I like to listen to the records we cover while I'm working during the day, and there was plenty of time I just had to stop for a minute. I was like, wait, I got to finish this song.
Yep.
I think that's a good thing though, and it's good to be challenged, and when you're challenged like this, you're like in it, through the annoyance, there's something really special there. You'll just keep playing it over and over again, and until it clicks, and again, having heard them in the 2000s, I was ready to dismiss this. I did not expect to like it the way I did, and I'm going to buy this. There's 100%. Flaws, I don't care. I think give me a few more spins, and I'll be singing right along with the operatic theme of them. Ah!
Nailing it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think the music on it is great, and I like the fact that it's got that old school production. The mix could have been better, but everything sounds real. Obviously, the drums don't, but they don't sound bad. They're not an annoyance. But for me, it's the guitar harmonies and Spiro or however you say his name. He plays bass and sings. His vocals are great. I love his death growl. It's coherent enough. You can tell what he's singing. He's just got a dark, really cool growl to him that fits this music perfectly. He kind of locks in on that melancholic vibe. And for me, it's those harmonies, man. They just hit that. They hit the right feel, the right vibe of the old style. And I love it. I think it gives the music a lot of emotion, and they could have done away with some of the frilly embellishments here and there, because the music, the riffs themselves are doing that. And another cool thing, I should have wrote down the songs that I noticed it on. His bass playing, there's some really cool bass lines that really stick out, and they're their own thing. The guy knows how to play bass, and he knows how to embellish what's going on in the guitars in a non-noodly but very expressive way. And I thought that really added a lot of flavor and cool elements to the music too as it went on. But yeah, it's just for me, the opera stuff. Her name is Natalie Rasulis. She can sing great, and my grandfather was big into opera, and though I didn't hang around with my grandpa on my dad's side much, my dad would get on these benders of listening to opera around the house once in a while because it reminded him of being a kid or whatever, and that kind of annoyed me. Not gonna lie. I mean, I think the talent's great, but the singing is just, it seems wrong and off to me, and she's doing a fantastic job, but it just doesn't seem right to me. And the fact that she's so loud in the mix is just an annoyance. And there's even, Kellen mentioned some of the instrumental breaks. There's a song on here called Microcosmos. It's very classically, I shouldn't say classically. It sounds like an animated Disney show tune type of thing. And it bugged me. I didn't like it. That could have been gone. That's going to be in my bad column for sure. But shit like that, I just kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, okay, here's 2 minutes that I could have lived without on the album. But get back to the metal, bring the metal back. But there's a good run of songs on here that are just so well written and heavy and dark, and we'll get into the production here in a minute. But yeah, for me, the songwriting is exceptional, and for their third album, there's a lot of growth and a lot of development here. It seems like they kind of got the layering figured out a little bit better than maybe some other people in their social musical circle. Not putting anything down on any of these other bands, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that. What'd you guys think of the production? I'm getting the impression that not so great.
It's not necessarily that the production is bad, because there is this element that is like endearing, right? Because it's like, oh, it's 97. If you loved this kind of death metal during that time period, like it's kind of on the tail end of probably what most people would consider the iconic death metal era, but it still sounds of the 90s, right? It's just like, in the same way that you would talk about production and understanding how to present the instruments within a sound stage, like in terms of where they sit, in terms of being forward, backwards, in the recording, what you immediately gravitate towards. It always felt like as a death metal record. I guess that's how I first think of this band. I first want to sort of go into this thinking is going to sound a certain way. The rhythm guitar section sounds so suppressed. It just was not as heavy as I wanted it to be, or like as forward within the mix, as present as in the room when you're listening to a record like this. So you kind of needed the band to get quiet down for that to be noticeable. And that just kind of goes to the downside of the record is what was center stage that was problematic is just how dominant a lot of the vocal presentation can be. Now, I will say this, like, there's also, as a death metal record, and Marty made a point about the, making vocals that were discernible. Like, they're actually writing good lyrics. I can go through the lyrics on this album, and they have some meaning to it. They aren't too boring to listen to, or there's not something like a conventional side to this that is sort of like dismissive. So I do like the fact that you can hear, enunciation on this record. But I just, at sometimes the vocals were so, specifically the female vocals were so jarring that it distracted, from these like incredible passages. I always felt like a great production, you should not have to choose between the vocal identity and the instrumental identity. They should, simultaneously be operating, and you can sort of enjoy them both. And I think at times in this record, it forced me to choose. And that really distracted, because when it's clicking on all cylinders, this is an incredibly captivating, immersive listening experience. It's moody, to your point about like, it's dark, but has an incredible amount of like emotional resonance. So that which made that sort of death doom, connection. So as much as like I loved a lot of this production, there are parts of it that were incredibly problematic that probably keep it away from being, a perfect record.
Right. What do you think, Jim? You're muted.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the production was definitely super problematic for me at first. I was like, oh my god, the vocals are way over the top. I can't hear the guitars. The program drums are super tinny. The guitars are thin. And then, but I kept listening, and then I started paying attention to what was going on, and kind of like, having to separate the instrumentation myself, since the mix wasn't doing it for me very well. And once I kind of, tuned my ears to what was happening, trained them to it, and then sort of separated the instrumentation out like that, I really started to embrace the record, and then I was reminded of a lot of things around that time, especially from Grease, sounded that way, if the bass sounding even heavier than the guitars were, the guitars are real thin, the tinny program drums. Now, only Septicflesh at the time was awash in operatic vocal, that was really drowning things out and making it difficult. And there are moments where it just got ridiculous. Like my least favorite song on the record is Tartarus. I don't know what was going on there. I think they were trying to do like a Celtic Frost Requiem type thing or something, and it just fell apart completely. But again, to your point, it wasn't boring. It was so bizarre. You're just like, I don't know where this is going, but it was like watching a train wreck. You couldn't take your eyes off of it. You had to see what was happening. But yeah, I mean, it made it really tough, and it made it a challenge. But but ultimately, when I started, putting it into the context of other albums that came around that region at the same time, what their sounds were like, I was like, oh yeah, you know what, I remember that, and I was like, but there, there's going to be some gems to find here, if they're, around that scene and around that time. And sure enough, there was. And for me, it's all about what the guitars are doing. Marty had a great point. The lead vocalist, he knows how to enunciate his death vocals, so it's not unintelligible. Which I don't mind unintelligible, but if you can somehow sound that aggressive and I can make out what you're saying, that just makes it a little bit more. You can connect to it a little bit more. So that was a nice plus. And definitely, Kellen, to your point, like there's something just kind of like it's kind of I don't know if nostalgia is the right word, but when you hear like that kind of simple drum machine type stuff, it's like it gives it a little color and a little character, and then it just becomes a part of it. It just kind of like it doesn't distract, and I think because what the composition as a whole, what the writing as a whole, both lyrically, guitar wise, keyboard wise, which are very, very interesting. The keyboards are here, and even the over the top vocal, like a lot of time and thought went into putting this stuff together, and even though the choices made behind the mixing board were odd at best, and almost like made it hard to be metal. If you took out the death metal vocal, it's there's points like where the guitars are so thin, it starts sounding like post punk or something like that. There's a little bit of jangly there. But I actually enjoyed it though. Again, it just gave it like a different sort of shade for me, musically. And so what's weird is like the production, though I really disliked it at first, it actually kind of added to the overall aura of the album by like my fifth listen or so. So now I would not, oddly enough, I wouldn't change it except for the mix. Except for bringing the levels of the vocals down. That's the one thing that I wish they would do. That's really irritating. But everything else I would leave as it is. It's got character.
All right. Well, for me, the mix is really the only thing that bugged me. I thought, other than the drum machine, I think the guitars and everything has got a very organic feel, and that's where the nostalgia came for me. The guitars got kind of a murky quality to them, especially in the harmonies, which adds to that sadness feel, and that's what kind of put me in mind of the early English feel, the English sound, the early My Dying Bride, the early Paradise Lost. They also had that kind of murky sound in their guitars, and the fact that each instrument's got its own lane, I think it's almost like the mixing was kind of a conscious decision. They're like, okay, we got, like Kellen said, there isn't a whole lot of, long standing riffs you can really hold on to. There's just there's the bass lines, there's the guitar lines, there's the keyboards, and there's these vocals, and they all have their own lane they stick in. Yeah, it doesn't really maybe necessarily gel and create like a sonic stew. It's just kind of everything's in its own space, and I think that kind of benefits the nature of some of these songs. When those harmonies kick in, they have a lot more impact. They're not lost. They're right out there out front, and those are the hooks of the song. Again, vocals are way too loud. His vocals are a bit too loud, but they're dry, and I like that. But her vocals are too loud and dry as well, where hers I would have liked lower with more atmosphere or reverb on them to give them more of a ethereal quality, but they're just so dry and up front. It just kind of highlights, what I don't like about opera singing. I mean, it just really brings it to the forefront for me there. If they would have mixed it down and given a more ethereal vibe, layered some reverb on there, and maybe keeping her a little more in check and here and there.
Was she reawakening some trauma there for you, Marty?
There's no trauma. This was such a, I don't want to be down because she's talented on her. And it's like these guys, they started off a certain way and then they rediscovered Into the Pandemonium by Celtic Frost. And they're like, okay, we're going to start, working in these orchestrations. There's a feeling, everybody thinks that, not everybody thinks that, In the Pandemonium is like this avant-garde classic, and you can tell there's some similarities between the shit they're doing here and what Celtic Frost were trying to do. It has a similar, and it bothered me when Celtic Frost did it too, to be completely honest. They didn't get it right until the end, but just the opera stuff, it just feels a little bit, it's ambitious. And I think it's cool. They're trying to do something a little bit outside the box. I mean, it had been done before. What they're doing isn't original, but it just seemed like they hadn't figured it out yet. And someone said the album that came after it is where they really went overboard with it. And then the band to this day still has symphonic qualities to them. I've seen like a recent video I watched when it came out, and they're really good at what they do. And they've gotten the symphonic stuff kind of dialed in. It's kind of a really cool part of their music. Here, it's still in its infancy. And, like this Microcosmos song, for what it is, it's well done. I mean, it's a pretty well composed piece. It just has a very Disney quality to it. I can see little, talking bunnies and birds kissing and shit going on in the background of it. And it kind of took away the dark element for me on that one track anyway. But yeah, as far as the overall production, I like it. The instruments sound real to me. It's got that old feel which I came up with, so I'm very. It's kind of refreshing to hear that, as opposed to all this stuff that a modern day Septicflesh album probably brick walled in the mastering, super loud, and everything is just so bombastic. And they've got a real drummer now. They probably mix him to sound like a machine anyway. So because you got the original songwriters in the band that are used to hearing that in their band. That's probably the way it goes. And I don't know. I don't have any of their modern albums. I've just seen videos here and there. But yeah, I like the sound, the mix. They could have done some effects and some different things with the mix, but does it detract away from the overall spirit of the album? No, I think in a lot of ways, the way the guitars are produced, for me, it adds to it. It just gives it that charm, that murky charm, feeling of dread, kind of. It's really cool. I dig it. Favorite, least favorite songs.
Okay, well, I think I already mentioned my least favorite, so I'm going to just get that out of the way. The Shamanic Rite song was the one that I just felt like it's so shrill. I guess that's the word that comes to mind. You talk about, I wish they had sort of softened her vocals a little bit.
Oh, and she goes on a lot in it too, like over and over and over. Anyway,
right? Yes, that like repetitive.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one is just completely broke the vibe on this record. But my favorite tracks. So the title track, Ophidian Wheel, all the way Phallic Litanies, on the topmost step of the earth, and the closer, Heaven Below.
Great song.
That ends this record. It came to mind because I remember talking about Volcandra last time. It's like they had an opportunity to close with a great song and just did not. It fell short,
Yeah.
This is like a chef's kiss way to end this album. It just completely on point. If there was ever a moment on this record where I was like potentially going to write it off, I stuck around for the last song, and they absolutely nailed this like moody, atmospheric, sort of goth death metal track. I love that one to end this record. There's a lot to enjoy here, so I really have a hard time picking one. But if I had to, the closer, Heavens Below, would be the one I choose.
Right on. What are yours, Jim?
So for me, definitely the title track, Ophidian Wheel. I agree with Kellen there. And I really liked also Razor Blades of Guilt. I mean, What a title, dude. that is metal right there, buddy. Super heavy on that one. Again, the melody, it's just sad, doomy melody riff, but played more, up tempo, and it just has had me making the Invisible Oranges. I really, really loved every minute of that. So that's my favorite tracks, Razor Blades of Guilt. But I love what you said about Heaven Below. Kellen, you're right. Like that song, man, where so many bands, I think the last few, metal club nights, like we're talking about bands, it's not, closing right. This album is closed correctly. That is a great song. Well worth the wait through the album. It's just epic. And it transcends the bad production. It transcends the goofy vocal, and you'll want to come back to it, through repeated listens. So I have to agree there. It's really great one. It's a close second for me. Another one, Geometry and Static. I really like that one a lot too, man. A great the vocal in that one I think is more balanced. It definitely isn't quite as overpowering on Geometry and Static. So yeah, just a great album all the way around. Shamanic Rite, you're right. That what is happening there? That's goofy. And Tartarus, yeah, the failed Rex IRA wannabe. It just wasn't happening there. But entertaining nevertheless. Like you gotta just let it play through once and just scratch your head on that one. It's entertaining for that reason. But yeah, just like Kellen said, I'll echo that. There's a lot to unpack here. And even if you just want to kind of pay attention to the bass lines like Marty, it was a great call out. The bass is really cool. And like, I think the distortion, I think he's got thicker distortion on his bass than the guitars do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. For me, favorites, Razor Blades of Guilt. That's like the bombastic, faster song on the album. And it comes at a good time on the album too. It's early on, but you could tell it's going to be a very downtrodden sounding album. That song kicks in. It's kind of a grit your teeth, shake your fist. Really aggressive, really good songwriting. On the Topmost Step of the World, another really great fucking song. A lot of emotion and interesting shifts in that one. Not necessarily jarring dynamics, just well written. And then of course Heaven Below, they ended on a great song, really heavy. And again, the lyrical concepts cut through that guy's performance while he stays sick and evil sounding. For me, as I mentioned, Necrocosmos is the Disney song. It's a crap song. It's a distraction to the flow of the album. And then Shamanic Rites, I put it on the fence because most of the song is pretty okay until they get to the na-na-nas where she does it a lot. And it's like, God, shut up, man. It's enough. It's enough. It's they beat that into the ground a bit too much. And then the Tartarus song, but the good way outweighs the bad on this for sure. Which leads us to our final thoughts. I think I kind of get the gist of where we're going here, but what were your final judgment, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, final thoughts. I'm happy that I chose this and I stuck it for this week. I kept playing it through. This was a good way to make sure that I was going to listen to it, and because if I had let sort of a brief moment of confusion, shelve this record, I would have missed out on ultimately one that like there's so much to enjoy, and like especially now I'm interested. This early era of Septicflesh I think is really cool, and this record is a lot to enjoy. Plus, it's like got me interested in different regions, right? Like I want to go check out Paradise Lost. I want to go look at Tiamat. That those records are now kind of more appealing to me as well because it set me in the mood for it. So, great record. Super happy to listen to it this past week, and I'll keep it going.
Yeah, Jim.
Loved it. I would say for me it's an 8.5. I really like it a lot. It would be a 9 if it wasn't for the overbearing moments of the vocal. That's really all it is. It's just shoving the voices down further in the mix, pulling the guitars up would have made it a really high, really rated album for me. Just because there's so much going on. I know I still have more to discover here. Even after multiple listens, and that's what great records do. You keep coming back to them, and you keep getting surprised. And so I feel like it's an early journey, and I'm going to be picking up their other 2 first albums, early albums as well. And I don't really care for anything after that, but man, this early stuff is on point. I think they really nailed something that was made sense at the time, but also is uniquely theirs. You know, they have their own voice, and it's something that I appreciate. So yeah, great call this week.
Yeah, I'm going to echo the thoughts here. It put this band on the radar for me. I like I said, I've heard some modern day Septicflesh. I like it, but it never made me think, I got to run out and buy their stuff, because I see myself listening to it a couple times, just kind of be like, I'm done. I don't need to hear it for a while. This shit again is in my wheelhouse. It's right in the pocket of that older stuff. And after today checking out their first album, I would give the first album a solid 9. I thought it was really good. Maybe a little more primitive sounding, songwriting wise, and sound itself, but there was none of the opera stuff, and it seemed to be a lot of the better. It seemed to highlight the elements that I really liked on this new album more. But yeah, I'm going to definitely from this album backwards be checking out some more Septicflesh, picking this stuff up. New stuff still on the fence for me. I don't know how far into their collection I'm gonna. When you start putting out albums called Revolution DNA or whatever, that's kind of I don't know.
The whole look, right? Like,
yeah, the fucking Dune suits or Battlefield Earth. Someone said that's fucking hilarious. Battlefield totally. Some Scientology space suits for sure. But, yeah, it was cool, and it was very cool to check this one out. Thank you again for picking it, Kellen. You did an awesome job on this one for sure. And which leads us to next week. I do want to say Jim's going to pick this week, but next week I'm going to be coming back from Minnesota. It's going to be a 12-hour drive. I should be home in time for showtime. So as of right now, everything is full steam ahead for Wednesday. But if we're not here for some reason, we'll be here. I'll be here. We'll be here for that. I'm just going to call it. We'll be here. But what do you have in store for us for next week, Jim?
All right, here we go.
Back to thrash.
Yeah. I'm gonna go really bizarre, man. We're gonna go Lizzie Borden.
Oh no!
Visualize.
Oh,
As you can see here, wipe the wimps. Lizzie rules. Yeah, I figured I'd just leave the sticker on there for you guys. Yeah.
No.
Get ready.
Oh no! I love the two albums. I love all the shit up to that album. What I've heard of that album, has that got Me Against the World on it?
It's got Me Against the World on it.
Oh, that song sucks. Okay.
That song changes your life.
Okay, Kellen, get ready. Just so you know, the shit that came out by Lizzie before that is awesome. With Jim picked, I can't say I've heard that whole album, so I can't rail against it. But what I have heard deterred me from ever getting it. So
okay.
You've been missing out, man. It's time to fulfill that gaping hole in your album collection.
Heavy emphasis on gaping. Yep. But yeah, and some program notes too. Friday we will be here with Darcy from 6 Strings 9 Lives will be returning again. We love hanging out, chatting with Darcy. We're going to be discussing the year 1986. Last time he was here was 1985. We're going 1 year further, 1986. So the professor will join us again, who's been lurking in the chat. Cheers to you, Alan. And no, I don't hate girls. I'm picky when it comes to them in metal, and it just didn't work for me in this time around. Oh, and the Nightwish comment. I will say I picked up a lot on eBay last year of the first 4 or 5 Nightwish albums. And in that context, where the singing is all that style and the music is kind of worked around that, I don't mind it. I don't love it, but I listen to it and I'm like, I can get into this. It's pretty well done, and she's mixed right, and everything sounds good. I mean, it's just, I'm picky. I'm just picky when it comes to that stuff. Am I listening to a ton of Nightwish? I am not, but I do have enough of their albums to say that I like them. They're great live. Their latest singer, Flora Jensen, I think's her name, or Jansen. She's amazing singer. But so yeah, I don't hate all girls in metal. That's not fair. Annika from The Gathering, some of the best shit ever. I love it so much. But yeah, and as always, thank you guys again. These are always fun. They're always fun to check out something we normally wouldn't have on our radar. I'm going to look forward to checking out the Lizzie Borden in full, I think, and it could be a fun little chat next week. Kellen, you're in for a fucking treat.
Okay, I'm bracing myself for this.
Oh, here we go. Tim hated this week, but he might like next week. But yes, and also check out Killing for Company's YouTube channel, Kellen's YouTube channel. He's doing great things. He only has like 286 subscribers, and he's doing some awesome shit over there. So definitely go over and check out Kellen's channel. We need to get him up to 1,000. And Jim, of course, runs Eihwaz Recordings. The link to his distro is in the description. Hey, thanks. It wouldn't have been anything without these two guys. Trust me. Glad we have them. And thank you for subbing. If you're not subscribed, please do so. It helps us out. It makes us look fancy and cool and all that stuff. Not, Disney opera songs mixed in or anything cool, but we're still pretty cool. But yes, until next time, we'll see you Friday, and we'll see you two gentlemen next week for sure. Y'all have a great night and hang on. We're going to end the broadcast, and everybody take care. See ya.